Usually, a medical diagnosis is, binary.
Right, like it's broken or it's not broken.
Exactly. You look at the x-ray, the doctor points to that jagged white line. And, I mean, there's this strange comfort in the precision of it.
Yeah, because you know exactly what you're dealing with.
Right. But then when you step into the world of human suffering, like profound personal loss, that x-ray machine just completely shatters.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally useless.
We aren't looking at clean lines anymore. We're walking into this diagnostic landscape that is just incredibly murky, where the symptoms seem to change by the hour.
And the standard treatments, the things people tell you to do, they often feel like they're doing way more harm than good.
Yeah, and that murkiness is just terrifying to the modern mind, I think.
It really is. I mean, we've been so conditioned by our culture, and especially by modern therapeutic frameworks, to just expect that every single human experience can be categorized.
Right, categorized and measured.
Measured, yeah, and ultimately managed. But grief just fundamentally resists being managed. It utterly refuses to stay within the lines of a clinical flowchart.
Which brings us to what we're doing today. Welcome to Reform Thinking. I'm so glad you're joining us today, really.
Yes, welcome.
Whether you are, prepping for a meeting or commuting, or you're just insanely curious about the deep things of faith and life,
Yeah.
this custom deep dive is tailored specifically for you.
And today's mission is, it's not a light one.
No, definitely not light, but it might be one of the most important conversations we ever have. We are looking at one of the most profound, raw texts on human suffering ever written.
Chapter 4 of C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed.
That's the one.
Yeah.
But just to be crystal clear about our mission today, we're not doing a survey of, modern psychological coping mechanisms.
No, not at all. The confessional Protestant sources we are drawing from today, they actively push back against that modern instinct to sanitize grief.
Yeah, because culture wants to give you what, like a 5-step checklist?
Exactly, a checklist just to get you back to baseline functionality. But that whole functional, pragmatic approach, it completely bypasses what Lewis actually experienced.
Right.
And more importantly, it ignores the profound theological reality of what God is actually doing in the midst of affliction.
So, guided by these theological sources, we're going to examine Lewis's grief through a rigorously reformed, historic Protestant lens.
Which is such a rich perspective to take.
It really is, because our goal is to discover how the sovereign God uses the crucible of affliction to basically shatter our mental idols.
Shatter them completely, yeah.
And bring us to the ultimate unyielding reality of himself. So it is heavy, it's bracing, but it's ultimately where true, unshakable hope is found.
To grasp the sheer weight of what's happening in this text, we really have to look at where Lewis is in 1960.
Right, set the stage for us.
So for decades, he was this formidable Oxford and Cambridge non, right? The brilliant Christian apologist who wrote The Problem of Pain.
He literally wrote the book on pain.
He did. He had constructed this massive, robust intellectual framework to explain suffering conceptually, but for most of his life, he was a confirmed bachelor.
Just living in his head, basically.
Pretty much. His world was books, his male academic friends, his routine. But then he marries Joy Davidman.
Referred to as H in the book, right?
Yes, exactly. And it was this intense, transformative, but very brief 4-year marriage, and the whole thing was completely overshadowed by her battle with advanced bone cancer.
So when he loses Joy, he isn't just losing a companion. It's not just sadness.
No, the loss acts like an earthquake. It tests the seismic stability of his entire theological foundation.
And his reaction is so visceral. He takes these 4 battered notebooks and just starts pouring out his darkest, most unfiltered thoughts.
He didn't even want his name on it at first.
Right. He published it under the pseudonym N.W. Clerk because the vulnerability of it was just so at odds with his public persona.
The confident apologist suddenly sounding like a broken man.
Yeah. And today, we're focusing entirely on the 4th and final notebook because those earlier notebooks are just full of this intense, almost chaotic philosophical turmoil.
But then, in chapter 4, something shifts.
It does. It doesn't resolve neatly with a bow on top, but it shifts into this really profound submission to divine sovereignty.
And I love how the chapter opens because it's a physical manifestation of that shift.
Oh, the notebook's right.
Yeah, he's writing and he notices he's reaching the literal end of the physical pages in this 4th notebook. There's just some old arithmetic scribbled at the back.
And he makes this deliberate choice.
Exactly. He makes a conscious choice that he is going to stop writing about his grief when he hits the end of this specific notebook.
He imposes a physical boundary on it, And that physical boundary is tied to this massive spiritual realization, right?
Because in the earlier chapters, you can feel him frantically trying to figure grief out.
Totally. He's analyzing his own emotions, trying to map the terrain, looking for some kind of predictable pattern.
But here, he realizes that grief simply cannot be exhaustively mapped. He draws this vital distinction between a state and a process.
Or like a map versus a history.
Yes, a map versus a history. And that distinction is crucial for understanding how we usually misdiagnose suffering.
Break that down for us, because that's fascinating.
Well, a map is static, right? It's a top-down, omniscient view of a territory.
You can see everything all at once.
Exactly. So if you have a map of grief, you can lay it out and say, okay, I am currently in the territory of anger, and if I just keep walking, I will cross the border into acceptance.
It gives you this total illusion of control.
But a history is lived in real time, on the ground. It's a process governed by providence, not by our navigation skills.
And modern culture loves the map analogy, don't we? We want grief to be a state we can conquer and just leave behind.
Check the box and move on.
Right. But Lewis discovers grief is actually a winding valley, and a valley dictates your path. You don't get to choose where it goes.
No, you just have to follow the terrain.
You might think you're walking in a straight line out of the darkness, like you're making great progress. But then the valley takes a sharp bend, and suddenly you are looking at a landscape that looks terribly familiar.
You get those partial recurrences of the pain.
Yeah, and you realize you weren't done at all.
Because in a winding valley, the mourner continually discovers new losses hidden inside the original loss.
It's not just one thing.
No, it isn't just the loss of the person. It's the loss of the future you planned with them. It's the loss of shared inside jokes. The loss of the person you were when you were with them.
The valley just keeps revealing these secondary amputations, as he calls them.
Which brings up a moment in the text that feels so counterintuitive. It almost shocks you on the first read.
Ah, when he goes for the walk.
Yes, Lewis goes for a walk, revisiting his old bachelor haunts, places he deeply loved before he ever met Joy.
And he notices that his old pre-marriage happiness is sort of returning. The beauty of nature is registering again.
But his reaction isn't relief.
Right. He doesn't say, oh, thank God I'm finally healing. His reaction is absolute horror. He literally writes, anything but that.
And that's because he recognizes the trap of that particular kind of healing.
Why is it a trap, though?
Because if his marriage to Joy was just an interruption, like a temporary holiday from his normal life, and he can just snap back to being the carefree bachelor he was before,
Oh, I see.
then Joy's existence is minimized. It means she dies a second time in his memory. Her historical reality just gets absorbed into his private narrative where her transforming presence no longer matters.
Wow, yeah. Because if he just reverts to the old C.S. Lewis, it implies that the crucible of the marriage and the loss didn't actually fundamentally change him.
Exactly.
So healing, ironically, terrifies the mourner. Because true healing demands a permanently altered identity. You cannot go back to who you were before the affliction.
Trying to go back feels like a profound betrayal of the person you lost.
This totally alters how we view the trajectory of recovery, doesn't it? It's not a return to the starting line.
No, not at all.
I was thinking about this in terms of movement, Like if grief were a board game, we'd expect to just keep moving our piece forward until we reach the healed square.
Roll the dice, move 5 spaces.
Right. But what Lewis is describing, these recurring pains, the impossibility of going backward, the bends in the valley, it feels more like climbing a spiral staircase in a dark tower.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Because you keep climbing. And every few days, you pass the exact same window, looking at it the exact same dark, bleak view.
And you feel like you haven't made any progress.
Exactly. It feels like you're going in circles, completely stuck, but you're actually moving to a different elevation.
Yes.
You are higher up, taking on the pain from a slightly more sanctified altitude, even if the view looks identical to last week.
The elevation is the key there. It is not a circular trench of despair where you are just pacing the same muddy ground forever. It's an elevation ordained by God.
But let me push back a bit, because how does this actually play out in real life?
Fair question.
Does the reformed view of sanctification expect us to continually revisit our deepest pains rather than, getting over them?
Well, yeah.
Because if I sit down with someone who is just weeping in my living room, and I tell them, hey, you're just going to keep passing the same dark window for the rest of your life, that sounds more like a curse than a comfort.
It does sound like a curse, yes. But only if the ultimate goal of the Christian life is unbroken emotional tranquility.
Which it isn't.
Exactly. The confessional framework argues that the goal of sanctification is not tranquility. It is being conformed to the image of Christ.
So the pain has a purpose.
God sovereignly uses these recurring bends in the valley, these spirals on the staircase, to expose the foundational bedrock of our hearts. When the valley feels the darkest, it is almost always serving a diagnostic purpose.
A diagnostic purpose, like
It's
what?
exposing the fact that our loves are entirely out of order.
Which is exactly the realization Lewis comes to. He does this massive structural self-correction in Notebook 4.
He really does. It's a huge turning point.
He looks back at the previous 3 notebooks, rereads his own agonizing words, and realizes his focus has been terribly sinfully inverted.
He diagnoses the order of his grief, right?
Yeah, he says it was. First, myself, then his wife, and lastly, God.
And he's discovering what Augustine called ordo amoris, the order of love.
Right, because the fallen human heart naturally inverts the proper hierarchy of reality.
Unsanctified sorrow turns entirely inward. It creates this self-centered gravity well.
And Lewis realizes that the suffocating, claustrophobic nature of his early grief is tied directly to this disordered love.
He wasn't just mourning joy.
No, he was mourning the loss of his own comfort, his own future, his own emotional stability.
And the mechanism he discovers to break that gravity well is fascinating. True healing requires returning praise to its rightful order.
But wait, praise feels like such a jarring word to drop into the middle of a journal about devastating grief.
It does seem out of place to modern ears.
How do we explain the mechanics of praise here? Why is praise the antidote to a gravity well of grief?
Well, in historic Protestant theology, praise is not just singing a song on Sunday morning. It is the supreme mode of love.
Okay, unpack that.
It is the act of recognizing and delighting in a thing for what it truly is, assigning it its proper value. Praise contains intrinsic joy because it pulls you out of yourself.
It breaks the inward spiral.
Yes, it allows us to enjoy a created thing without trying to possess it, consume it, or elevate it to the status of a god.
Ah, I see.
Lewis realizes he has to reorder his reality. God must be praised as the ultimate infinite giver, and his beloved spouse must be praised as the finite, beautiful gift.
And to illustrate this, Lewis brings up these 2 stunning metaphors for joy. First, he remembers her as a sword.
Such a sharp, unexpected image.
It really is. It represents her strength, her temperance, her resolve, this piercing, unsentimental intellect she had.
She was a brilliant thinker.
But then he realizes a sword doesn't capture her entirety, so he supplements it with the image of a nest of gardens.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it represents hiddenness, fertility, fragrance, a deeply intricate and organic beauty.
But, the theological breakthrough doesn't occur just because he finds better metaphors for his wife.
Right. Metaphors aren't enough.
The breakthrough happens when he follows the trajectory of those metaphors upward. He ascends from the creation to the creator.
He moves from admiring the garden to praising the gardener.
Exactly. And he moves from marveling at the sword to bowing before the divine smith, who actually forged and tempered that weapon for heavenly service.
Let's wrestle with the practical application of this for a second, because this is where the theology really hits the pavement.
Okay, let's do it.
If I sit down with a friend who just buried his wife, and I tell him, hey, you need to stop focusing on the garden you lost and start looking at the gardener, I am going to sound incredibly callous.
Oh, incredible.
It sounds like I'm telling him his grief is selfish or that he needs to love his spouse less in order to love God more.
And that is exactly how it sounds if we approach it through the lens of a zero-sum game, where loving God means subtracting love from your spouse.
Right, like there's only so much love to go around.
But the Reformed sources argue the exact opposite. Praising God as the ultimate source of beauty does not demean the creature. It actually secures the creature.
How does pointing away from the creature secure it? That feels like a paradox.
Consider the crushing weight of idolatry.
Okay.
When we demand that a finite, created human being, a spouse, a child, a friend, be the absolute source of our joy, our ultimate foundation, and our reason for existing, we are placing a divine burden on human shoulders.
And they were not built to bear that weight.
They weren't. We turn a beautiful memory into a mental idol. But loving the gift as a gift frees it from that crushing expectation.
You were finally loving the person truthfully as a magnificent creature, rather than falsely as a deity.
Yes. When Lewis ascends from the garden to the gardener, he isn't abandoning joy. He is placing her safely in the hands of the only one who can actually preserve her reality.
So the alternative is that if we don't ascend to the gardener, if we keep treating the person we lost as the ultimate foundation of our happiness, we are essentially building an idol out of our grief.
We are. Our grief becomes a monument to a false god.
And human nature is incredibly prolific at this, isn't it?
Hmm.
Which brings us to God's relentless, merciful response to our idolatry.
This might be the most striking phrase in our entire deep dive today.
Yeah, it's the hinge of the entire fourth chapter.
Hmm.
Lewis writes, God is the great iconoclast.
The great iconoclast. It echoes John Calvin's famous observation that the human mind is a perpetual factory of idols, a fabrica idolorum.
We just can't stop making them.
Right. We don't just build idols out of wood or stone or gold. Our primary manufacturing plant is the human imagination.
And the sources make a really brilliant philosophical distinction here.
They do. They distinguish between phantasmagoria, which are subjective, humanly generated mental constructs, or eidolon.
Like illusions.
Yes, illusions, and true objective reality, which is the icon.
And the way this plays out in grief is terrifying. We construct this phantasmagoria. Lewis calls it a pasteboard palace.
A pasteboard palace, yeah.
We take all our memories of the person we lost. And because we can't handle the complex, independent, often messy reality of a real human being, we flatten them out.
We turn them into a static, idealized mental photograph.
And the truly dangerous part is that we do the exact same thing to God. We build a mental idol of God that is comfortable, predictable, and fundamentally manageable.
Because we prefer the pasteboard palace. We can control the narrative inside of it.
Right.
But God, in his absolute covenantal mercy, continuously smashes these mental idols. He is the great iconoclast.
He refuses to let us worship a shadow.
Because worshiping a shadow will eventually starve the soul. He shatters our pasteboard palaces, not out of cruelty, but to force us to engage with his uncreated, independent reality.
And Lewis uses an incredibly vivid parable to explain how easily we trick ourselves into thinking our pasteboard palaces are real.
The dark cellar.
Yes, the dark cellar. He talks about a man sitting in absolute darkness in a cellar. He hears a sound.
And he panics.
Right. Because of his limited senses, his isolation, and his fear, he constructs this whole narrative. He thinks he is locked in a prison, and the sound is a threat. Maybe a jailer coming to mock him.
When in reality,
The sound might be a friend standing outside in the open air, trying to get his attention. It just highlights how radically limited our five senses, our intellects, and our memories really are when we are in the dark cellar of grief.
the human mind actively lies to itself to survive the dark. I mean, we are finite, yes, but we are also deeply prone to self-deception.
We accurately report our present pain like, the man in the cellar is truly afraid.
But we are radically mistaken about our actual situation in the cosmos. We mistake the mental photograph for the person. We mistake our theological, domesticated concept of God for God himself.
It's like we prefer a badly lit, fading Polaroid of our loved one over the real person, simply because the Polaroid fits in our pocket.
It's manageable.
Yeah, we can pull it out when we want to, and we can put it away when we're done. It never disagrees with us, it never surprises us or demands anything from us.
But the real person was complex. They argued with you. They had their own mind.
Exactly. But the Polaroid is safe, and we do that to the creator of the universe. We want a pocket-sized deity who exists to comfort us on our terms.
And the supreme historical act of God smashing that Polaroid, the ultimate act of divine iconoclasm, is the incarnation of Jesus Christ.
Because the religious and political structures of the first century had built massive pasteboard palaces of what the Messiah should be.
The Jews expected a political conqueror who would overthrow Rome.
And the Gentiles wanted a philosopher king.
But God shatters every single one of those expectations by coming in the flesh as a carpenter from Nazareth.
A suffering servant who is mocked, beaten, and dies a criminal's death on a cross.
He leaves all previous human ideas of the Messiah in absolute ruins. Reality is inherently iconoclastic to human assumptions.
Now, to explain this difference between a humanly constructed sign and divine reality, Lewis touches on something deeply sacramental.
Ah, yes, the communion wafer.
He talks about receiving a communion wafer. He notes that the wafer is thin, cold, and completely tasteless. And he asks a profound question. Isn't it actually an advantage that this wafer doesn't pretend to have the slightest physical resemblance to the divine reality it points to?
Because, as he says, I need Christ, not something that resembles him.
Right. So how does this fit into the Reformed understanding of reality versus image?
Well, the theological mechanics here are vital. The confessional Reformed view of the Lord's Supper strictly rejects transubstantiation.
The Roman Catholic doctrine, that the physical bread literally transforms into the physical body of Christ.
Right. The Reformed view argues that Christ is spiritually present and the bread remains bread. And the sheer unpretentiousness of that physical bread actually protects the worshiper from idolatry.
Because if the bread was glowing, or if it tasted like the most magnificent feast on earth, our senses would be overwhelmed by the sign itself.
We would worship the bread.
We'd be obsessed with the experience of eating it.
Precisely. If the sign is too beautiful, too compelling in a physical sense, fallen human nature will stop at the sign. The physical simplicity, the very tastelessness of the wafer, acts as a boundary.
It prevents us from worshiping the physical object.
Yes, and it forces the soul to bypass physical aesthetic pleasure to feed spiritually by faith upon the resurrected Christ. It forces us to seek the reality, not just a feeling, a memory, or a symbol.
And if God is relentlessly demanding that we seek him the true reality, and not just a symbol or a feeling of comfort, it forces a deeply uncomfortable self-examination.
We have to look closely at our ultimate motives in grief.
And this brings Lewis to what I think is the most terrifying moment of self-awareness in the entire book.
It is piercing because it exposes the utilitarian nature of so much modern religion.
So Lewis is analyzing his own heart, and he realizes he might only be turning back to God because he sees God as the only available road to get joy back.
He desperately wants to be reunited with his wife.
Right. He looks at the cosmos and figures, well, God is the gatekeeper of the afterlife. God holds the keys to heaven. So I need to get right with God, say the right prayers, and submit so that eventually God will give her back to me.
And this unpacks a grave theological error that the confessional sources warn against vehemently. It is the error of treating God as a means to an end.
An instrumentum.
Yes, an instrumentum, rather than the absolute end, the summonum, or the telos.
And we see this everywhere in how faith is marketed today, don't we? God is constantly sold as a therapeutic assistant or a cosmic life coach.
Oh, all the time.
If you just follow these steps, have enough faith, or pray this specific way, God will deliver personal happiness. Or, in the context of mourning, a happy, tear-free family reunion in heaven.
But the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, shatters that utilitarian approach completely.
God demands to be loved for his own sake.
He is the creator. He will not be reduced to a stepping stone to reach a created idol. To approach the sovereign God merely as a bridge to obtain an earthly desire is to attempt to make the creator of the universe a servant of human lusts.
That's a profound form of spiritual adultery.
It is, and God will not bless it.
Because of this utilitarian mindset, humans constantly bombard God with demanding, self-centered questions. When someone dies, our first instinct is to demand an accounting from God.
We want all the answers.
We ask about the exact mechanics of the afterlife, how memory works in eternity, cosmic fairness. Why did you take her?
Yeah.
Will she remember me exactly as I am? Will we be married in heaven?
And Lewis suddenly realizes these are what he calls nonsense questions.
Yeah, he compares them to asking how many hours are in a mile or if yellow is square or round. The categories are just completely confused.
Because we are attempting to cash theological blank checks for realities we haven't experienced yet, we're using a limited, finite vocabulary that is entirely bound by time and space.
We are demanding God explain the eternal geometry of heaven using our temporal, earthly crayons.
That's a great way to put it.
I understand the theology there, but practically, this is incredibly hard to swallow. When you are in the deepest pit of grief, God's silence in the face of those desperate questions feels agonizing.
It really does.
In chapter 1, Lewis said turning to God for comfort felt like going to a door, knocking, and hearing it slammed in your face, followed by the sound of double bolting on the inside.
That imagery is haunting.
But now, in chapter 4, he looks at that exact same silence, and he calls it a compassionate gaze. How do we bridge that gap? Why is it compassionate for God to stare silently at a weeping person and call their agonizing questions nonsense?
It is profoundly frustrating to the flesh, but the mechanics of that compassion become clear when you realize what God is protecting us from.
What's he protecting us from?
The silence is compassionate exactly because God refuses to let us build those pasteboard palaces in hell forever.
Pasteboard palaces in hell. That is a heavy concept.
Well, think about it. If God answered our nonsense questions on our own distorted terms, he would be validating our idolatry.
He'd be playing along with the delusion.
Exactly. He would be participating in our delusion, confirming that our finite, self-centered view of the universe is correct. By looking at us with a silent, compassionate gaze that essentially says, "Peace, child, you don't understand," He is driving us back to reality.
His silence on speculative metaphysical matters is actually a mercy.
Yes. It drives us back to the revealed practical duties of the two great commandments. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor.
It grounds us. It pulls the mourner out of this sentimental, speculative spiritualism where they're obsessing over the exact temperature and geography of the intermediate state.
And puts their feet firmly on the ground of present obedience.
The message is, you don't have to understand the metaphysical mechanics of eternity to obey God today. You can still care for your remaining family, you can still worship, you can still serve your neighbor, even while the massive, agonizing questions remain completely unanswered.
The secret things belong to the Lord, but the revealed things belong to us. That is where we find actual stability in the winding valley. Not in figuring out the map, but in taking the next faithful step.
And this stark distinction between objective reality and sentimental spiritualism comes into even sharper focus when Lewis describes an actual encounter or a deeply sensed presence of joy.
Oh, yes. This part is crucial.
And this is so entirely contrary to how our culture portrays encounters with the dead. If you watch a modern movie about grief, an encounter with a lost loved one is always this warm, glowing, emotional, tear-soaked reunion.
But Lewis describes his encounter with joy's presence as crisp, brisk, unemotional.
He uses Greek terms, right?
He does. He uses terms associated with pure intellect, nous, and resolute will thelema. It wasn't fluffy or sentimental. It was solid and wide awake.
And here we have to establish a crucial theological boundary, one that Lewis himself is very careful to maintain in the text.
Very careful, yes. He explicitly refuses to use the subjective experience as doctrinal evidence for anything. He writes, I'm not mad enough to take such an experience as evidence for anything.
Why is that restraint so important for the listener to understand?
Because the confessional Reformed sources adhere to the doctrine of cessationism regarding revelation.
The canon of Scripture is closed.
Exactly. We do not seek extra-biblical revelations to build our theology. We absolutely do not commune with the dead, which is necromancy and explicitly forbidden by God.
So subjective experiences, no matter how crisp, vivid, or emotionally compelling they feel in the moment, are completely unauthoritative.
Our sole, infallible rule of faith and practice is the written word of God.
So Lewis isn't trying to build a new doctrine of the intermediate state based on a feeling he had in his study late at night.
Not at all. What the experience does for him is serve as a powerful contrast. It contrasts the sharp, wide-awake, resolute reality of the spiritual life against the fluffy, sentimental, nostalgic ghost stories our modern culture prefers.
It reminds him that eternity is more real, more solid than the shadowlands of earth.
And it forces the conversation to shift away from vague spiritualism to the ultimate anchor of Christian hope.
Because our hope is not found in some disembodied cosmic consciousness where we float around as pure intellects.
Definitely not.
Our hope is anchored in the historical, bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ, as the Apostle Paul lays out in 1 Corinthians 15.
This is a vital theological mechanism that destroys ancient Gnostic dualism.
Gnosticism, remind us what that is.
Gnosticism was the early heresy that claimed the physical body and the material world were inherently evil prisons, and that salvation was escaping into a pure, ethereal spiritual state.
You can see why Gnosticism is incredibly tempting to a grieving person.
Oh, highly tempting.
Because if you were sitting in a hospital room watching someone's physical body waste away from bone cancer, you want to believe the body doesn't matter. You want to detach the essence of the person from the failing physical vessel as a coping mechanism.
You say, well, they're just a free-floating spirit now. The body was just a shell.
But Orthodox Christianity vehemently rejects that. Christ rose physically. He had scars. He ate fish on the beach with his disciples.
Because Christ lives physically, those who die in him are not dissolved into an abstract mist or a cosmic energy field. The body matters immensely.
They await the glorious historical day of his return, when the trumpet shall sound and the dead in Christ will be raised incorruptible.
Which is such a better hope. Modern culture wants heaven to be a warm, fuzzy blanket of nostalgia. We just want to sit around a campfire in the sky with everyone we've ever lost, telling the same old stories forever.
But Lewis is pointing toward a reality that is far more bracing. It's like waking up from a fever dream by plunging into a freezing, crystal-clear alpine lake.
Oh, that's a good way to picture it.
It's a shock to the system. It's bracing.
Yeah.
But it is the most awake you have ever been. It is solid, unyielding reality.
That alpine lake analogy perfectly captures the essence of icon over phantasmagoria. It is objective, unyielding, undeniable reality, devoid of human sentimentality.
So, if our ultimate hope is the physical resurrection, this solid, bracing reality, how does that practically change the way a believer stands at a graveside today?
It changes everything.
When you are standing on the astroturf, looking down at the casket, how does this specific theology change the mechanics of that moment?
It fundamentally changes what burial is. It changes burial from a mere disposal of a ruined vessel into a sowing in hope.
Sowing, like planting a seed.
Exactly. Because Christ rose, we do not look backward. We aren't trying to call the dead back to a fallen, broken world through our memories, our seances, or our endless mourning.
We look forward to the ultimate source of life.
The body is planted like a seed, held in trust by the earth, awaiting the king's summons.
Which brings us to the magnificent conclusion of Lewis's journal. After all this turmoil, all the winding bends in the valley, the shattered mental idols, the silence of God, the nonsense questions, he closes with a stunning quote in Italian, taken from Dante's Paradiso.
Poi si tornò all'eterna fontana.
Then she turned back to the eternal fountain. Let's unpack the literary and theological weight of this illusion. What is happening in Dante's work that Lewis is actively applying to joy?
So in Dante's epic, Beatrice has been his guide through the heavens. She's been his focus, his love, his reason for ascending.
Right.
But eventually she reaches her eternal appointed place in the mystical rows of the redeemed. And in that climactic moment, she steps back. She completely turns her gaze away from Dante.
She looks away from him.
Yes, she directs her eyes forever upon the absolute glowing light of the triune God.
To a modern romantic mind, that feels like a gut punch. It feels like a rejection. Like, I loved you all this way and now you're turning your back on me. But Lewis applies this exactly to joy.
Because he finally understands what she is turning toward. He realizes that joy's ultimate peace, her ultimate telos, is not found in her marriage to him.
Her ultimate peace is found in her sovereign Redeemer.
God is the fons vitae, the fountain of living waters. She does not remain turned toward Lewis, consumed with earthly nostalgia or lingering longings for the Shadowlands.
She turns completely to the eternal fountain.
And in doing so, she is finally fully herself.
This is such a heavy, glorious truth, and it demands massive practical application for the modern church.
It really does. The confessional sources refer to this framework as the third use of the law.
Explain the mechanics of that quickly.
Sure. So the first use of the law is pedagogical. It acts as a mirror to show us our sin and drive us to Christ. The second use is civil. It restrains evil in society.
But the third use?
The third use is normative. It serves as the perfect guide for the believer's grateful obedience. The law shows us how to live in a way that pleases the God who saved us.
And if we apply this third use to grief, it explicitly exposes and rejects two massive errors that have infected modern Christianity. First, the prosperity gospel.
From a confessional standpoint, the prosperity gospel is a devastating heresy. It falsely implies that if you just have enough faith, if you decree and declare the right words, you are guaranteed physical health, wealth, and exemption from tragedy.
It treats God entirely as an instrumentum.
Yes, and it is a lie that completely shatters the moment you enter the winding valley of grief. When the cancer isn't cured, the prosperity gospel leaves the mourner not only grieving, but feeling abandoned by God and guilty for supposedly lacking faith.
And the second error is therapeutic pragmatism. This is the approach that only cares about making the sufferer functional again.
The goal of counseling becomes entirely horizontal.
Yeah, like let's just get you back to work, let's just get you to stop crying, let's find the right coping mechanism so you can sleep.
But from the perspective of our sources, true pastoral care requires so much more than functional pragmatism.
True pastoral care requires sitting patiently in the winding valley, recognizing the sovereign hand of God in the affliction.
It means refusing to offer cheap slogans or unbiblical platitudes. You don't tell a grieving mother, God needed another angel, or at least she's in a better place.
You sit in the dark cellar with them, and over time, you continually, gently reorient the sufferer's gaze away from their own self-pity, away from their shattered pasteboard palaces, and back to the sovereign decree of God.
You point them to the giver, not just the lost gift.
Let me ask a final clarifying question. And I want you, the listener, to really think about the implications of this for your own life.
This is the crucial question.
If the ultimate goal of the glorified soul in heaven, like joy, like Beatrice, is to turn away from earthly attachments and gaze entirely at the eternal fountain, is the ultimate goal of the grieving soul still on earth to do the exact same thing, even while the tears are still falling?
That question cuts to the very core of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. Question 1 asks, What is the chief end of man?
Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever.
Yes. The ultimate goal of the grieving soul is to find their supreme end, their absolute joy in God, even from the bottom of the deepest valley.
When God becomes our ultimate end, our earthly losses, though they are agonizingly, viscerally painful, lose their power to ultimately destroy us.
Because our true treasure remains entirely untouched in the heavens, we turn to the fountain, even through our tears, because the fountain is the only thing that will never run dry.
Let's recap the profound journey we've taken today. We started by breaking the clinical X-ray machine and realizing that grief isn't a static map you can just chart out and check off. It is a winding, unpredictable, providential valley.
We saw how true healing requires reordering our disordered love.
Putting God first as the ultimate giver and our loved ones second as the magnificent finite gift. We watched the supreme iconoclast mercifully shatter our pasteboard palaces, proving that God will never just be a means to an end.
And finally, we anchored our hope not in some sentimental, ghostly nostalgia, but in the bracing, solid reality of the bodily resurrection and the eternal fountain of Christ.
It is a theological masterclass that wasn't written in a sterile ivory tower. It was forged in the furnace of actual, devastating affliction, which is why it speaks with such undeniable authority.
Absolutely.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We spent this entire time talking about how God shatters our idols in the midst of profound, life-altering grief.
But divine iconoclasm doesn't only happen when we are standing at a graveside.
Look at your life right now. Where is God currently acting as an iconoclast in your daily routine?
What pasteboard palace is he knocking down?
Is it a pasteboard palace of career success, of perfect family image, or even of comfortable theological pride? What is he mercifully knocking down right now so that he can give you the unyielding, uncreated gold of himself?
It is a terrifying grace, but it is a question we all must eventually answer.
Thank you for joining us on this custom deep dive on Reformed thinking. We hope that lingering question stays with you and that you find true comfort in the God who breaks through the murky, muddy waters of our understanding to show us the solid, eternal ground of his grace. Until next time.